To understand the Siege of Khe Sanh, you first have to understand the silence. In the movies, war is always loud. It is a constant cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and shouting. But for the 6,000 Marines trapped on a small plateau in the northwest corner of South Vietnam in early 1968, the war wasn't defined by the noise. It was defined by the waiting. The waiting for the fog to lift. The waiting for the supply planes to land. The waiting for the shell that had your name on it. Khe Sanh wasn't just a battle, it was a fishbowl. We were the fish, and the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, were the cats prowling around the glass, tapping on it, waiting for the right moment to smash it. For 77 days, the eyes of the entire world were fixed on this one red clay airstrip. President Lyndon Johnson had a sand table model of the base built in the White House Situation Room. He obsessed over it. He made his generals swear in blood that Khe Sanh would not fall. He was terrified that this would be America's Dien Bien Phu, the catastrophic defeat that had forced the French out of Indochina 14 years earlier. But for us, the grunts of the 26th Marine Regiment, digging into the laterite soil until our hands bled, politics didn't matter. What mattered was that we were surrounded by 40,000 of the finest infantry soldiers on earth, and there was nowhere left to run. The geography of Khe Sanh was a nightmare. It sat on a plateau, surrounded by hills that looked down on us like the walls of a coliseum. To the north were the hills labeled 881 North and 861. To the west was the Laotian border and the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was a place of haunting beauty. In the mornings, a thick white mist, the Kraken, would roll in from the mountains, swallowing the base whole. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The dampness soaked into everything. Your clothes were never dry. Your skin was never dry. The red dust turned into a thick, sticky mud that coated your rifle, your food, and your thoughts. General Westmoreland, the commander of U.S. forces, believed that Khe Sanh was the bait. He wanted to use the base to lure the NVA into a set-piece battle where he could use American air power to destroy them. He got his wish. The NVA took the bait, but they brought more hooks than Westmoreland ever imagined. The buildup began slowly, almost imperceptibly, in the winter of 1967. It started with the sensors. We had seeded the jungle around the base with seismic sensors and acoustic bugs. Day after day, the intelligence officers in the bunkers would watch the needles on their machines jump. Footsteps. Thousands of them. Trucks moving at night. Voices. The NVA were moving entire divisions, the 304th, the 325th, into the hills around us. These were not local Viet Cong farmers with rusty rifles. These were hardened regulars who had fought at Dien Bien Phu. They had artillery, they had tanks, and they were digging in. They dug trenches that zigzagged toward our wire, inch by inch, night by night. We could hear them digging. Sometimes, on quiet nights, if the wind was right, you could hear the clink of a shovel hitting a rock. It was the sound of a noose being tightened. I remember the patrol that changed everything. It was mid-January. A reconnaissance team from the 3rd Marines, Team India, was operating on a ridgeline about 2 clicks from the base. They were moving through the elephant grass when they stumbled into it. Not a trail, but a highway. The grass had been trampled flat by thousands of boots. Then the ambush was sprung. The firefight was brief and brutal. The radio crackled with screams for help. When the reaction force finally got to them, they found the bodies. But they also found something else. They found a map case on a dead NVA officer. Inside were detailed diagrams of the Khe Sanh combat base. They knew where our bunkers were. They knew where the command post was. They knew where the ammo dump was. The intelligence was terrifying. They weren't just passing through. They were here to stay. And they were going to erase us from the map. But the final warning came from the enemy himself. On January 20th, a day before the siege officially began, a figure emerged from the fog near the runway. He was waving a white piece of cloth. He was an NVA lieutenant, a defector. He walked up to the wire, hands raised, shaking. When the intelligence officers interrogated him, he didn't hold back. He told them, "Tonight. It begins tonight. You will be hit with everything we have. The hills will be overrun. The base will be destroyed." Most of the brass didn't believe him. It felt too convenient, too staged. But Colonel Lowndes, the commander of the base, a man who always wore a drooping handlebar mustache and looked like he belonged in the 19th century cavalry, took it seriously. He ordered a red alert. Every Marine was ordered to full combat gear. Flak jackets on, helmets on, bayonets fixed. We sat in our trenches, watching the sun go down, watching the shadows lengthen over the hills. The air was heavy. The birds had stopped singing. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. We smoked cigarettes, shielding the glow with our cupped hands. We checked our ammo for the 100th time. We wrote letters home that we didn't know if we'd ever get to mail. "Dear Mom, things are getting a little hot over here." That was the understatement of the century. Then, at 00:30 hours on January 21st, the world ended. It didn't start with a scream. It started with a low whistle. Thump, thump, thump. We heard the distant sound of the enemy mortars firing from the tree line. Then, the whistle of the rounds coming in. "Incoming!" The cry went up and down the line. We dove into the bunkers. The ground shook as the first rounds impacted. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed everywhere. But this was just the opening act. The NVA were targeting Hill 861, the high ground overlooking the base. They launched a human wave attack, hundreds of soldiers charging up the slope under the cover of a mortar barrage. The Marines up there fought hand-to-hand in the dark, using knives, entrenching tools, and rocks when the ammo ran out. Down at the main base, we listened to the radio traffic from the hill. It sounded like hell on earth. "They're in the wire! They're in the wire! Flash blue! Flash blue!" We wanted to help them, but we couldn't, because moments later, the main base began to take fire. And this time, it wasn't mortars. It was rockets. 122mm Soviet-made rockets. They sounded like freight trains tearing through the sky. When they hit, they didn't just explode. They disintegrated everything within a 50-meter radius. One of the first rockets that landed changed the course of the entire siege. It was a lucky shot. Or maybe, thanks to that map they found, it was a precise shot. The rocket slammed directly into the main ammunition dump, the ASP. 1,500 tons of high explosives, artillery shells, mortar rounds, C4, grenades, small arms ammunition, all of it stored in one central location. The explosion that followed is impossible to describe with words. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force. The shockwave lifted men off the ground and threw them against the bunker walls. It blew the sandbags off the trenches. It shattered the eardrums of anyone who wasn't wearing protection. I looked up from the bottom of my foxhole, and I saw the sky turn into a sheet of solid flame. A mushroom cloud, like a miniature nuclear bomb, rose thousands of feet into the air. And then, the secondary explosion started. For the next 48 hours, the ammo dump kept exploding. Tear gas canisters stored in the dump cooked off, releasing a massive cloud of CS gas that drifted over the entire base. So now, not only were we being shelled, but we were choking. We had to wear our gas masks. Have you ever tried to dig a trench while wearing a rubber gas mask in 90-degree heat, while the ground is shaking from explosions? It feels like being buried alive in a coffin. The fire from the ammo dump burned for days. It was a beacon, telling the NVA exactly where we were. It destroyed 98% of our ammunition stocks. In the first hour of the siege, we had lost our teeth. We lay there in the mud, gasping for air through the rubber filters, watching our supplies burn, listening to the rockets scream in, and we realized the lieutenant was right. The gathering storm had finally broken, and we were drowning in it. The psychological impact of that first night cannot be overstated. We were the United States Marines. We were the hunters. We were the ones who called in the airstrikes. But suddenly, we were the ones huddled in holes, praying for it to stop. We realized that the enemy had artillery that could reach us, and we couldn't reach them back. They had dug their guns into the reverse slopes of the Kho Rock Mountains in Laos, miles away, untouchable by our counter-battery fire. They could pound us at will, day and night, and there was nothing we could do but take it. The isolation set in immediately. Route 9, the only road connecting us to the coast, was cut, ambushed, mined, bridges blown. There was no way out on the ground. The only lifeline was the air. The C-130 Hercules transport planes, but the NVA knew that too. They positioned their anti-aircraft guns, 37mm and 12.7mm heavy machine guns, all around the valley. They turned the approach to the Khe Sanh runway into a gauntlet of death. Every time a plane tried to land, the sky would light up with green tracers. We would watch from our trenches, holding our breath, willing the big lumbering planes to make it down. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. I remember watching a C-123 come in on the second day. It was low, trying to duck under the fog. I saw the tracers stitch a line across its wing. The engine caught fire. The plane rolled over, slow and graceful, and slammed into the hillside just outside the perimeter. A ball of fire. Then silence. No survivors. That was the message the NVA was sending us. You are trapped. No one is coming to save you. You are going to die here. Oh, but Marines are stubborn. If we couldn't run and we couldn't attack, we did the only thing left. We dug. We turned Khe Sanh into a subterranean city. We went deep. We scavenged timber from the destroyed bunkers to reinforce our roofs. We stole runway matting, heavy steel plates, to cover our foxholes. We filled millions of sandbags. The red clay became our skin. We ate it. We slept in it. We wore it. Life shrank down to the size of your fighting hole. You knew the man to your left and the man to your right. And that was your entire world. The mood in the trenches was grim, but it wasn't defeated. There was a dark humor that took over. We made jokes about the Khe Sanh target practice. We placed bets on where the next round would land. We put up signs. Home is where you dig it. Khe Sanh Country Club, members only. It was a way to stay sane. Because if you stopped laughing, you started thinking. And if you started thinking about the odds, 6,000 against 40,000, you would crack. And some men did crack. We called it the 1,000-yard stare. You'd see a guy sitting in the corner of the bunker, just looking at the wall, not blinking, not responding when you talked to him. His body was there, but his mind had checked out. It had gone somewhere safe, far away from the rockets. We didn't judge them. We just made sure their weapon was clean and pointed outward. Because we needed every gun. The siege had just begun. The NVA were tightening the noose, and the trenches were about to become our homes, and for many, their graves. After the destruction of the ammo dump, life at Khe Sanh settled into a terrifying routine. We entered the ring of fire. The NVA artillery strategy was simple. Deny us sleep, deny us movement, and deny us sanity. They shelled us around the clock. At breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, and especially at night. We learned to distinguish the sounds of death. The 122mm rockets were the loudest. They screamed like banshees. The 152mm artillery shells from Laos came in with a heavy, rushing freight train sound. The mortars, the 82mm and 60mm, were the worst because they gave almost no warning. Just a soft pop in the distance, and seconds later, an explosion inside the wire. We developed a shell psychosis. You found yourself listening to the air even when it was silent. You'd be talking to a buddy, and suddenly you'd both freeze. Eyes wide, head cocked to the side. Did you hear that? Every movement above ground was a gamble. Going to the latrine was a life-threatening operation. Most guys just stopped going. We used empty C-ration cans or ammo boxes inside the bunker. The smell in the bunkers became a mix of unwashed bodies, human waste, rotting sandbags, and fear. But the most dangerous place on the base was the airstrip. We called it Sniper Alley. The runway was our umbilical cord. It was the only way food, water, and ammo came in, and the only way the wounded got out. The NVA knew this. They zeroed every inch of that aluminum matting. Every time a C-130 or C-123 touched down, the hills would erupt. Mortars would walk up and down the runway. We had to run out under fire to unload the cargo. It was called the gaggle. You didn't march, you didn't walk. You sprinted. A forklift driver would race out, grab a pallet, and race back behind a revetment while shrapnel pinged off his roll cage. I saw a C-130 take a direct hit to the cockpit while taxiing. The pilot slumped over. The plane veered off the runway and exploded. We watched our friends die trying to bring us beans and bullets. And then there was the water. In the heat of the day, thirst was a torture. The water point was exposed. To get water, You had to run the gauntlet with 5-gallon jerry cans. People died for water. Eventually, we stopped washing. We stopped shaving. We stopped caring about how we looked. We became the damned. Our uniforms turned orange from the red clay. Our eyes were sunken and red-rimmed. We looked like animals digging in the dirt. But amidst the squalor, there was brotherhood. I remember sharing a single can of peaches with 3 other guys in a hole while rockets landed 50 yards away. We passed the spoon around like it was a sacred object. That peach slice tasted better than any steak dinner I've ever had. We talked about the world. That's what we called America. It felt like a different planet. A planet where people slept in beds and didn't have to listen for whistles in the sky. What are you gonna do when you get back? I'm gonna buy a Corvette. I'm gonna sleep for a year. I'm just gonna drink a glass of cold milk. Dreams kept us alive. But the enemy was getting closer. They were digging trenches toward our perimeter. Sapping at night. Under the illumination flares that drifted down like ghostly chandeliers, you could see the fresh earth of their trench lines getting closer to our wire. 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. They were tightening the noose. We could hear them talking at night. Sometimes they would taunt us. Marine, you died tonight. Marine, go home. It was psychological warfare. They played funeral dirges over loudspeakers. And then there were the rats. The shelling had destroyed the vegetation, driving the rats into our bunkers. They were huge, bold. They crawled over us while we slept. They ate our food. They bit the wounded. It felt like nature itself had turned against us. We were fighting the NVA, the artillery, the thirst, the rats, and our own minds. One night, a sensor on the perimeter tripped. Then another, then another. Stand to. Stand to! We rushed to the firing ports. Out in the fog, shadows were moving. Hundreds of them. The NVA were probing the lines. They weren't launching the main assault yet. They were testing our reflexes. We opened up. The M60 machine guns chattered, spitting red tracers into the mist. The Claymore mines were detonated. Boom, boom. The shadows fell or melted back into the dark. When the sun came up, we saw the bodies caught in the barbed wire. Some of them were just kids. NVA regulars, dead, their hands still gripping wire cutters. We looked at them with a strange mix of hate and respect. They had walked through a wall of steel to get to us. They weren't giving up, and neither were we. General Westmoreland had declared that nuclear weapons were being considered if the situation got desperate. We heard rumors about it. Nukes? Are they crazy? We didn't want to be saved by a nuke. We just wanted air support. We wanted the Phantoms and the Skyhawks. And above all, we wanted the arc light, the B-52s. But the enemy had a surprise for us. A surprise that no one expected in the jungle. February 6th changed everything we thought we knew about the war. 5 miles southwest of Khe Sanh was a small special forces camp called Lang Vei. It was held by 24 Green Berets and a few hundred indigenous troops. That night, the impossible happened. The survivors from Lang Vei radioed us in a panic. Tanks! They have tanks in the wire! We thought they were hallucinating. The NVA didn't have tanks. And even if they did, how could they drive them through the dense jungle and across the river? But they were right. Soviet-made PT-76 amphibious tanks rumbled out of the darkness. They crushed the perimeter fences. They drove right over the bunkers, collapsing them on the men inside. They fired point-blank into the command post. It was a slaughter. From Khe Sanh, we could see the tracers and the explosions at Lang Vei. We listened to the screams on the radio. Help us! We are being overrun. But we couldn't move. Colonel Lowndes refused to send a relief column. He believed it might be a trap to lure us out of our fortifications so we could be ambushed in the open. It was the hardest decision of the siege. We had to listen to the Green Berets dying just 5 miles away. When the sun rose, Lang Vei was gone. The NVA flag was flying over it. And now, they had tanks. And they were looking at us. The fear at Khe Sanh skyrocketed. We had light anti-tank weapons, laws. But would they stop a Russian tank? We dug our holes deeper. We slept with bazookas next to our pillows. But the tragedy wasn't over. 3 weeks later, on February 25th, came the darkest day for the 26th Marines. The Ghost Patrol. Throughout the siege, we had been sitting ducks. We hadn't aggressively patrolled outside the wire because the enemy was too strong. But the intelligence officers believed the NVA were digging a new trench system just a few hundred meters to the south. They ordered Bravo Company to go out. A reconnaissance in force. It was a mistake. Captain Weissenberger led his men out of the perimeter early in the morning. The fog was thick, pea soup. Visibility was zero. They moved about 400 meters into the elephant grass. They didn't find a trench. They found a regiment. The NVA were waiting for them. It was a perfect L-shaped ambush. Suddenly, the fog lit up. Heavy machine guns, mortars, and RPGs opened up from three sides. Ambush! Ambush! The Marines of Bravo Company were cut down in seconds. The point platoon was wiped out. Men were pinned down in the open grass, unable to see where the fire was coming from. Lieutenant Jacques, a platoon commander, tried to rally his men. He was hit. He kept fighting. He was hit again. The radio was chaos. "We are taking heavy casualties. We can't move." Back at the base, we tried to give them fire support, but it was too close. We couldn't fire artillery without hitting our own men. Captain Weissenberger ordered a withdrawal. But how do you withdraw when you are carrying more dead than living? They had to leave bodies behind. That is the ultimate sin for a Marine. You never leave a man behind. But they had no choice. If they stayed, everyone would die. The survivors crawled back to the wire, dragging the wounded. Their uniforms were soaked in blood. Out of the 40 men in that lead platoon, 27 were dead. We watched them stumble back through the gate. It was a walk of the dead. For weeks afterwards, we could see the bodies of our brothers lying in the grass just outside the wire. We couldn't get to them. The NVA used them as bait. If we tried to go out, they would snipe us. The smell of the decomposing bodies drifted into the base when the wind shifted. It was a smell that haunted us. It was the smell of failure. The morale hit rock bottom. We felt abandoned. We felt like pawns in a game we didn't understand. The NVA were building a tunnel right under our noses. They were driving tanks. They were slaughtering our patrols. And Westmoreland kept telling the press, "We have them exactly where we want them." From inside the mud and the blood of the trenches, it felt like they had us exactly where they wanted us. If the ground belonged to the NVA, the sky belonged to the United States. General Westmoreland unleashed Operation Niagara. The goal was to create a waterfall of bombs around Khe Sanh, to disintegrate the enemy before they could overrun us. It was the most concentrated aerial bombardment in history. Day and night, the sky roared. The F-4 Phantoms came in low, dropping napalm. The canisters would tumble end over end, silver flashes in the sun. Then, a wall of orange fire would roll over the jungle. The heat was so intense we could feel it in our bunkers a mile away. It sucked the oxygen out of the air. But the true god of the siege was the B-52 Stratofortress, the arc light strikes. Usually, B-52s strike from 30,000 feet. You don't see them. You don't hear them. But at Khe Sanh, the enemy was so close, sometimes within 300 meters of our wire, that the bombers had to drop danger close. We would get a radio warning. Arc light in 3 mics. Heads down. We would crouch in the bottom of the trench, open our mouths to equalize the pressure, and put our hands over our ears. Then, the world would end. It wasn't a boom. It was a continuous rolling earthquake. Whump, 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 whump. The ground rippled like water. Dust fell from the ceiling of the bunkers. Teeth rattled in your head. 3 aircraft, each dropping 108 bombs. A box of destruction 1 mile long and half a mile wide. When the smoke cleared, whole hillsides had vanished. The jungle was turned into toothpicks. We cheered. We stood on the trench lines and cheered like it was a football game. Get some, yeah! It was the only thing keeping the NVA human waves at bay. Every time they massed for an attack, the sensors would pick them up, and the arc light would erase them. But bombs couldn't feed us. We were running out of food. We were running out of ammo. The NVA anti-aircraft fire had become so intense that C-130s could no longer land. They tried parachute drops, but half the pallets blew into enemy territory. We watched NVA soldiers running out to steal our rations. We were starving. The pilots of the 1st Marine Air Wing came up with a desperate solution. the super gaggle. It was an aerial ballet of death. Instead of one big plane, they used a swarm. First, A-4 Skyhawks would dive bomb the NVA anti-aircraft positions on the ridges, saturating them with napalm and tear gas. Then, under the cover of the smoke, a dozen CH-46C night helicopters would race in at treetop level. They didn't land. They couldn't. They hovered 3 feet off the runway. The crew chiefs kicked the supplies out the back. Ammo, water, plasma. At the same time, we would throw the wounded onto the birds. It had to be done in seconds. Kick the boxes out. Throw the bodies in. Go, go, go! The noise was deafening. Rotors chopping, jets screaming overhead, anti-aircraft rounds bursting in black puffs. It was organized chaos. I remember watching a CH-46 take a hit. It spun wildly, rotor blades clipping the ground. It crashed in a ball of fire right on the LZ. We ran into the fire to pull the crew out. The heat was blistering. The pilots who flew the Super Gaggle were the bravest men I ever saw. They knew the odds were suicide, but they flew anyway, because they knew we were down there waiting. Thanks to them, we held on. March arrived. The siege had lasted 50 days. The shelling hadn't stopped. The sniping hadn't stopped. But something had changed. The NVA attacks were becoming less frequent. The sensors were showing movement away from the base. The arc lights had broken their back. They had lost thousands of men in the Niagara firestorm. The noose was loosening. On April 1st, 1968, Operation Pegasus began. The 1st Cavalry Division, the Air Cav, was coming to get us. We heard them before we saw them. The distinctive whop-whop of hundreds of Huey helicopters coming from the east. They leapfrogged down Route 9, reopening the road, blasting the NVA positions that had choked us for months. When the first tanks of the relief column rolled through the main gate of Khe Sanh on April 8th, the reaction was strange. There was no cheering, no parades, no hugging. We just looked at them. We were filthy, emaciated, hollow-eyed. They were clean, fresh, loud. They looked at us like we were ghosts. And maybe we were. The siege was over. 77 days. We climbed out of our holes. We stood up straight for the first time in months. The sun felt different. The air tasted different. We walked around the base, looking at the destruction. The cratered runway. The shredded tents. The mountain of brass casings. We found the bodies of the Bravo Company patrol. We finally brought them home. We put them in body bags and loaded them onto the helicopters. Then, the order came down. The order that broke our hearts more than any shell ever could. Abandon the base. The High Command decided that Khe Sanh was no longer strategically important. They didn't want to tie down troops defending a static position anymore. They wanted a mobile war. So, we were ordered to destroy everything we had fought for. We blew up the bunkers we had dug with our bare hands. We burned the timber. We bulldozed the trenches. We leveled Khe Sanh. I remember standing on the ramp of a C-130, waiting to fly out. I looked back at the red plateau. It was burning. Smoke rose into the gray sky, joining the mist. I thought about the 274 Marines who died there. I thought about the 2,500 who were wounded. I thought about the bodies of the NVA soldiers buried in the hills, maybe 10,000 of them. All that blood, all that fear, all that courage. For what? To hold a piece of dirt for 77 days and then give it back to the jungle? It was the ultimate absurdity of Vietnam. We won the battle. We killed the enemy. We held the line. But as the plane lifted off and Khe Sanh disappeared beneath the clouds, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt empty. I survived Khe Sanh. But a part of me, the innocent part, the young part, is still buried in that red clay, waiting for the incoming whistle that never ends. Years later, I went back. The base is gone now. It's a coffee plantation. The trenches are filled in. The craters are covered in green bushes. But if you dig down a few inches, you can still find them. The rusty shell casings, the torn bits of flak jackets, the ghosts. The wind still blows through the valley. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it, the silence. The terrible waiting silence of Khe Sanh. This has been the story of the Siege of Khe Sanh, a story of endurance, sacrifice, and the futility of war. Thank you for watching Beneath the Metal. We tell these stories not to glorify war, but to remember the men who lived it. Please subscribe and share this video to honor their memory. Semper Fi.